Hey guys, welcome again. This is going to be a two-parter. What I'm doing is utilizing Nick Winkleman's presentation. I'm going to go through it because I think it's one of the best presentations over periodization anybody has written, as it looks at a bunch of different periodization models and stuff we can kind of look at and understand in an easy way. So I'm going to do my best Nick Winkleman impersonation. For those of you who don't know, he was the former Exos education coordinator. He is now over in Ireland working with National Irish Team Rugby as the overseer of all athletic performance and education. So this was taken from National Conference and Exhibition for NSCA, National Strength and Conditioning Association, in 2012. Again, it will be a global view of periodization, and it'll define each model and how it is used and some research behind it. So here we go. The objectives, periodization, again. Want to define and present the basis for using periodization. Discuss considerations for using periodization. Discuss periodization profiles for novice, intermediate, and advanced athletes. Again, this is utilized more for athletes, but the ideas behind those programs and periodization models is directly proportional to any periodization model that we might utilize for, say, strength training. Provide examples based on athletes' performance training system. So utilizing a lot of what I have done with our strength program. So the basic periodization, creating a long-term plan. Again, this annual plan, what we talk about is what is the end goal for our clientele. For example, our strength training program for our adults. What is the end goal? What do we want them to achieve at the end of the year, or at the end of the 6 months, or even at the end of the micro, mesocycle, or even macrocycle? Okay, so history of periodization. Katov, back in 1917, obviously it was an Olympic sport back then. So it was general, it was preparatory, and had specific stages for improvement. So kind of a progressive overload using Eastern Bloc methodology. Mataveyev in 1964 was a former USSR Eastern Bloc strength trainer. He founded the traditional theory and defined as the subdivision of the seasonal program into smaller periods of training cycles. Mataveyev did this intensity chart that is in the NSCA book, in where as technique gets more complicated, say for a clean or an Olympic lift, your base of force or strength might be smaller, right? Because we can't lift as heavy of a load when we're trying to do something as explosive. If you listen to the plyometric presentation I did, we talked about that force velocity curve, right? The heavier the load, the slower the speed. That's an example of Olympic lifting. The trick is to move that over to make sure that you are being stronger and faster in those movements. So we look at the traditional, which is preparatory period. So we have general, or preparatory period, and then specialized preparatory period. We go into the competition phase, then we go into the transition phase. Competition phase is preseason, then we got our main season. Our transitional phase is postseason. Okay, and back into that preparatory phase. That also lines up with a linear phase model. Kramer and Hakkinen in 2002 defined programming as the variation in training stimuli, the use of planned rest periods to augment recovery and restoration of an athlete's potential. Again, rest and recovery in between sets is the key to increasing load progressively over a period of time. Our body has to recuperate our energy system in order to ask, or if we're asking it to repeat that same intensity level, to repeat that in a successful manner. Mike Stone, in 2004, who is one of the program chairs, I believe, for Middle Tennessee or Tennessee State, one of the two. He is a big one in the NSCA. His wife, Meg, as well, is a department chair at that school. Phenomenal, smart people who have really taken exercise science for the NSCA and really transformed it in the late 90s and early 2000s. And he defined it as a logical phasic method of varying training volume intensity factors and exercise in order to optimize training progress. Then Verkhoshansky and Sif, Mel Sif wrote Super Training, phenomenal book, very tough read. Verkhoshansky wrote a coach's manual for training. Verkhoshansky is very Eastern Bloc as well. Mel Sif is a physiologist and an extremely smart man, uses Eastern Bloc methodology, defined as a long-term cyclic structuring of training and practice to maximize performance to coincide with important competitions. Their thought is they want to maximize performance in preparation for important competitions, i.e. powerlifting meets, i.e. Olympic trials, i.e. Olympic Games. Okay, so their basis was training people to get them prepared for important competitions. Now, we look at our clientele, we're preparing them for activities of daily living, making them stronger for that. So we still have to have an end goal. There so happens to be more of the Olympic base. Moving on, cycle of hierarchy. So we look at the quadrennial cycle. So that's a multi-year plan over or equal to 4 years. A macro cycle, which is less than a year, a description of complete training for less than a year. Mesocycle, 3 to 4 week blocks. Microcycle describes one structure of unit or 1 week of the mesocycle. Workouts describes a structural unit, hours and minutes, the 1 day of workouts. We're all familiar with workout of the day. That would be the semblance of a workout. Microcycle would be week 1 of a 4 week mesocycle. Mesocycle also is typically called as a phase. Generally, most phases are done in 4 to 6 week segments based off of whatever training methodology you want, and then a recovery phase. Okay. Loading parameters. So we look at our big four, right? We got volume, intensity, volume load, and RPE or cybernetics, okay? So volume describes the total number of lifts completed in a training session. Example, 4 lifts, 4 sets times 6 reps equals 96 lifts. Very important because if we go too high a volume, our recovery is not going to be apropos and we will have some injuries. Intensity describes the quality of each lift and is measured as power or watts, repetition maximum, or percent of 1 rep max. Generally speaking, we use 3 different types of intensities. We use the Prilepin chart, the NSCA chart, and sometimes we'll use Tudor Bompas chart. So all of them have kind of the same basic, right? We look at intensities or percent of 1 rep max. Again, we could also look at watt. If you look at our Kaiser, that pulls out wattage, right? That's speed of movement, right? That's transition of power. Repetition maximum, muscle endurance, how many reps or AMRAPs, as many reps as possible. Volume load describes the total training stimulus and is recommended variable for tracking loading status. Example, 4 sets, 6 reps at 100 kilos, which is about 220 pounds, equals 2,400 kilograms of total volume load. Again, very important because our total volume load has to be within a certain realm in order for us to get the end result of where we're trying to go. RPE or cybernetics describes the subjective impact the intensity of each lift session has on an individual. Each lift in session is rated from 1 to 5. Ratings for perceived exertion. Borg's scale of ratings perceived exertion is on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the most difficult, 1 being the easiest, okay? And that will fluctuate based on the lift in the session. All right, so that's some background on that. Why periodization? Well, decreased risk of overtraining. I gave the interns, if you've ever been an intern here, general adaptation syndrome, which is Hans Seeley's model for overtraining. We want to manage fatigue. Not many of us get the proper sleep or recovery required to excel our gains. Optimize performance over specific time period. 1 to 3 week peak events, example track and field, indoor, outdoor, or sporting season, example soccer, very long, right? Cyclical structure maximizes general and specific preparation. So the ability to structure your workouts in a cyclical manner maximizes its general and specific preparation. Accounts for individualization, training status, age, and available time period. So again, specificity for each person that comes through, their status, their training age versus their chronological age versus their biological age. We got to take into account that. We got to take into account people that have been lifting for a long period of time versus those new people that come into the strength classes. Periodization considerations. So we look at a couple things here. Peak performance is achieved when the correct periodization profile is executed. Driving factors should include training goals and needs analysis. If you looked at my previous PowerPoint presentations, needs analysis is the key into creating a great program. Training time period. So we have a few things within that training time period. Delayed transformation, transfer of training, progressions, training residuals, and training status level. So we look at delayed transformation. Fatigue accumulates and gains diminish over the course of a training phase. For a desired adaptation to be realized, period of unload or peaking, our recovery week, should be completed. Time to peak adaptation is directly related to the period of overload. Example, 4 weeks of overload will require 4 weeks of unload for specific adaptation to peak. Again, we minimize this to a 1 week unload or deload or recovery week because we are not having a specific peak season. In other words, we're not prepping somebody for a peak season. Transfer of training. So we look at overload to specificity in that in that picture right there, sequential or concurrent development of motor abilities will have a compounding outcome that exhibits positive, negative, or no change on performance. Optimal transfer is the result of complementary strength and movement qualities being developed in the correct sequence and key considerations, right? So as we have the proper overload to specificity, we will get better over time. When we have the improper load or load too fast and we try to be too specific, we will fail and or get injured. That is the key consideration. Progression hierarchy. So motor abilities should be developed in a logical sequence that is general to specific, simple to complex, slow to fast. If you know me and you've read any of my articles or continuing education, I'm big on sequencing. Sequencing is huge. So we look for general movements, front squat, maximum strength, right? Move up the pyramid of scheme, specialized movement. Hang clean, very specialized, explosive strength. Move out to specific movement, acceleration, starting strength. For us, think of any kind of our load or our core exercises, that general movement, that first movement within our strength training protocol. Our specialized movement, and this doesn't mean in order, means what they have to get good at before they move on to specialized or specific, okay? So general movements have to be mastered until we order them or ask them to do more specific or specialized movements. Training residuals or detraining. Length of time specific adaptation is sustained during a period of detraining where training stimulus is removed, i.e. intensity. We can always do the same movements. Again, the only thing we control is intensity. Major limiting factors, a couple of them here. Duration of developmental period, your general preparation period versus specific, early to ripe, early to rot. Again, if we prep them too quickly, too fast based on their goals and needs, we can have them poop out or not be peaked when they need to. Again, athlete specific. Training age status, again, looking at that needs analysis. Specific motor abilities, what abilities do they currently have? What abilities do we want them to have? Maintenance of work completed. So what do they have that we have to maintain? If they're really fast, we have to maintain that, okay? Training residuals or detraining. So we look at a couple of our systems here, adaptive quality, detraining description. So we're looking at the aerobic system, very obviously oxygen-based. We're looking at detraining of 30 plus or minus 5 days. So what happens there, we increase mitochondrial density, right? That's in our muscles. Capillary density, aerobic enzymes, and glycogen storage. We become more efficient. Anaerobic, 18 plus or minus 5 days. Anaerobic enzymes, we look at some buffering, right? So it's very important that we homeostasis and we buffer, and glycogen storage also will increase. Maximum strength, again, looking at that 30 plus or minus 5. Neural mechanisms, myofibril density, our muscles become more dense, more full. Strength endurance, 15 plus or minus 5 days. Looking at myofibril density, aerobic and aerobic enzymes, so kind of both because we're hitting strength and endurance, and lactic acid tolerance. Again, lactic acid is not the result of being sore. Lactic acid is a byproduct of our energy systems. Maximal speed plus or minus 3 days with 5 days. So motor control, neuromuscular function, and phosphocreatine storage, we're looking for that maximum speed, that quickness, that speed. Training residuals affect the periodization profile used and should be based on the identified limiting factors in addition to the structure of competition phase. Looking at periodization profile. So what we can do to kind of section off our beginners, our middle, and our advanced people. So I'm going to cut this right here. This will be part 2 where we can go ahead and dive in a little bit to a periodization model.